We're going to have some fun. In 30 years of business, I've seen almost everything done well imaginable, and I've made a lot of mistakes. I'd like to share with you today the 5 mistakes that you as a company, regardless of your size, do not want to make. And I want to give you some ideas on how you might avoid them. I want to be able to talk to the startups in the room and the large companies as well. How many of you in the room are from large companies? Good news is, and the bad news is, that 40% of your companies won't exist in 10 years. How many are from startups? The bad news is 70% of you will not exist in 10 years. And the point that I'm talking about is the speed of change that we're about to see, we've not seen before. And so it's so important to control your destiny during a period of disruption, as opposed to let the market determine what you're doing and the changes. If I were to draw a parallel, how many of you think Silicon Valley is the place to be for startups today? Let me give you some data. Silicon Valley used to be the place to do startups. It used to be where literally, if you look at the market, 61% of the unicorns were just 4 years ago, only 41% today. And if you look at the number of IPOs coming out of the US, and this is a challenge for us, during the 90s, during the internet boom, it was 750 per year. And today, it's slightly under 200. The point that I'm making, regardless of where you are in the world, if you're not disrupting, if you're not moving ahead, you get left behind. How many of you would have said France would be the place to bet on 4 years ago? Now, we're going to do a lie detector test after this. But it was 4 years ago when I got a call from the business leaders here in France and said, "John, this country's changing. You've got to come over and invest." And I said, "I love the people, but there's no way I'm going to put resources into France, much less do a startup. I'll come and visit you and we'll have dinner." And they said, "No, come to the Consumer Electronics Show and watch how our startups are so different." So I did. There were 66 startups at the Consumer Electronics Show. I talked to all of them from France. 38 the year before. And when I talked to them, it was like I was talking to Silicon Valley people, except with a different accent. I then said, this is changing. I can connect dots. Pattern recognition, I'm pretty good at. 38 the year before to 66. You know what that is today? 274. 4 years later. The equivalent number to the US. When I said that over 3 years ago, France would be the next big thing, it will be the gateway for innovation into Europe, and it will lead in startups. How many of you believe that? And you know you are today. You watched 4 years ago the number of venture capital-backed startups, 143 a year. This year, last year, 743. You've become a country that is changing, and Europe is changing in terms of innovation. But it's important to realize you're going to have to scale at a faster pace than your counterparts have around the world. You've got to think more out of the box in terms of what is possible. And your government leadership here has done an amazing job where 85% of the foreign leaders now believe investing in France is a logical thing to do. And 4 years ago, that wouldn't have been over 25%. So what mistakes are you going to make, regardless if you're a big company or a small company? Let's start with a smaller company. First mistake you're going to make is run out of cash. Second mistake you're going to make, and you're thinking, does my product really add value to the customers? The third mistake you're going to make is literally you're not going to stay and get your customer loyalty that you need to be successful as you move forward. The fourth one is you're going to be disrupted by a new competitor and a new market and a new place in the market. And the fifth is you're not going to really have differentiation. That's what all the articles say, but that's not the case at all. The real issue is very simple. That's the symptoms. My parents were doctors. You focus on the underlying issues. The number one reason the companies in this room will fail or be successful on the other side is you will get the market transitions right. You will clearly understand the market transitions enabled by technology, where every company in the world becomes a technology company. The second thing that you want to watch, and this is to be very careful, is the large companies, just like the American automotive companies, the European automotive companies, they did the right thing for too long. The startups, if you're a startup and you're doing the same thing peers are already doing, you're doing the right thing for too long as well. You have to catch these market transitions and move with speed. And innovation, which I used to think about as a speed of market, and the word process was like a dirty word. It's bureaucracy. I was wrong. To do innovation fast in a large company or smaller company, you have to have a replicatable process behind it. You have to think how this occurs in ways that it hasn't done before. I would argue you put customer first. How many companies in this room put customer first? How many companies in this room give really good service to their customers? Let's see the show of hands. 80% of your CEOs will say we deliver great service to the customers, they love us. You know what the customers say? Less than 8% of our customers believe that we care about them and we do a good job on service. And you've got to also change leadership. Either the leadership has to progress and change, or the leaders have to be changed. Market transitions. I was part of Boston 128. For those of you who have ever seen Boston 128, you literally see a change where it was the high-tech center of the world. We couldn't even spell Silicon Valley. It went from thousands of high-tech companies to one. Mini computer era got wiped out. They missed the market transition. The same thing can happen to Silicon Valley or to Europe if you don't catch the market transitions at the right time and the right way. Think about it in terms of doing the right thing too long. Speed of change is dramatic. I was part of the Walmart board of directors. We saw Amazon coming. We thought we were moving fast and changing. Yet in 21 years, Amazon developed a larger market cap. In other words, the financial community's expectation of Amazon larger than Walmart. To give you an idea how fast things are changing, it took Tesla 14 years from its founding to move past what GM's value was. It took Uber 7 years to move past Tesla. You know where I'm going. 21, 14, 7. Transitions now occur in 3.5 to 4 years. So when you think about a large company or a small company, it's all about speed of innovation and how do you really begin to make that happen. And this is where innovation cannot be just creativity and each time reinventing the wheel. Speed of innovation is about learning how to do the same thing very rapidly. At Cisco, we acquired 180 companies. I don't think anybody would disagree that in the high-tech industry, we invented how to do it, and we do it today better than anyone else. But it was a very replicatable process, the steps we would go through, and when we didn't follow the steps, we would get into trouble with it. You begin to think about putting customers first. At Cisco, as an example, literally we had the highest customer satisfaction in the world. But as CEO, I listened to every critical account every night myself in terms of the direction. And you know where I'm going with this. It is about, do you say customers are first or do you actually make it happen? And leadership change, what is the average life expectancy of a CEO, whether you're a startup or whether you're in a large company? 5 years. Why is it 5 years? Because CEOs have trouble reinventing themselves. And it's hard to do. But yet, if you're really going to lead your startup or lead your company, whether you're the CEO or part of the leadership team, you have to reinvent yourself. It's hard to do when you think about what true reinvention is and in terms of the direction. How many people are comfortable in this room with change? Really comfortable. Are you married? Yes, you're married. Do you really like your partner? Are there times you have doubts? Probably yes. She's turning red. And you know what I'm doing here? I could have asked any one of us, and here's the relationship that is most important to us in life, and yet even teasing about it makes it uncomfortable. To be successful as a company, you have to create a culture and an attitude of change and say, how do you change rapidly, and how do you reward that? And your CEO, she or he, has to reinvent themselves every 4 to 5 years. I probably made 6 transitions at Cisco. And if I didn't, I would have got left behind in terms of the direction. I'm now in venture capital, but I'm really in spatial purpose focus of venture capital. I'm looking at how do we create jobs, because with artificial intelligence and digitization, we're going to destroy a lot of jobs. The large companies in total will probably not add any headcount over the next decade. So that means that startups not only have to generate our traditional job creation, they've got to generate the jobs that are being displaced in other segments of the economy. And that's why you see political leaders understanding that, whether they're in India or whether they're here in France or around the world. When I look at where I put my time and energy, I set an audacious goal. I want to change the world one more time. My goal is to grow the headcount in my startups by 40 to 50% per year, which means your revenue has to be 50% plus. I'm doing that across 14 companies. And it isn't so important what I'm doing. It's the concept, this replicatable process that allows you to move so fast if you do it right. What I look for, very simply, I begin to look for where there is a market transition going on, usually a technology and a business transition at the same time. Now, this is for you thinking about where your company, where your startup or a big company is positioned. The second thing I look for is a world-class CEO who she or he understands this and really wants to be coached, because my real value is I know how to scale. Taking an organization from 70 million to 47 billion, 400 people to literally 75,000, and then acquiring 100 companies and getting them to fit into it. The third thing I look for is the customer references. If you really want to know how you're doing, how do your top customers say how you're doing? I then look for a market transition and an inflection point in the market, and then I look for what the management team looks like, who are their advisors, who's on their boards. And so again, it's a very replicatable process that allows me to move with speed. What mistakes will a CEO make, especially the CEO of a startup? And remember my messaging here, what are the 5 mistakes you don't want to make as a company? The first mistake that many CEOs will make is they understand the value of vision and strategy. They understand the importance of building a leadership team to accomplish that vision and strategy. But where they break down, and especially in the new startups and new CEOs, is they don't understand how important culture is to a successful company. You never have a great company without a really strong culture. You may like the culture, you may not, but there's a huge strength of culture when you look at an Oracle, a Microsoft, a Cisco, and other companies. And you have to walk that talk as a leadership team, and I would argue culture is more important than strategy. It's the foundation for the changes you make as an organization. And when companies break down, it's usually because their culture breaks down. The other element of a successful CEO is about how you communicate. And communication is a learned skill. I used to get so scared of presenting ahead of time, I'd throw up, literally. I was dyslexic, so I tried memorizing things and reading speeches didn't work. But by practice, you get better and better. I got asked in a startup session about 2 hours ago, they said, John, how do you handle tough questions? How do you handle tough questions, sir? I ask you a question like, your quarterly numbers are just terrible. Why should you still be CEO? And your answer would be, you deal with facts with emotion. So I ask him a question on facts, and his answer should be, I've had a 10-year run, I've done the numbers every quarter, I've got an easy transition in front of me, trust me, I will get you there because my track record has been there. The other question might be, all right, you've been a CEO for many years, isn't it time for change? And how do you deal with that? With facts. You go through your track record of the last 10 years, you've gone through how successful you've been. So one message on communication, if you all walk away from this meeting with, is I want you to think about when you handle tough questions, whether it's with your employees, whether it's with the media, whether it's with your investors or shareholders, when you get an emotional question, deal with it with facts. And when you get a factual question that's really tough, deal with it with emotion. Does that make sense? Second issue is companies have trouble scaling, especially startups. You often see that at 100 people, 500 people, 1,500 people, and when you go to 5,000. So when you scale, the way to do it right is to create a replicatable process, whether it's in your interview cycle, whether it's how you catch market transitions, whether it's how you recruit new people, or how you handle people that are leaving the company and you want to keep them, the process that you want behind it. Really important point. True of large companies, but even more true of startups. Most of the startups I deal with have brilliant young CEOs. And they are so good at engineering or so good at sales, they assume their skills will carry over to another area. You've got to know what you know and know what you don't. Usually a great engineering lead is terrible picking a new sales lead. Or they think they understand sales in the country and they try to do distributions and channels. So you've got to be realistic and then surround yourself with people who complement what you don't know. You've got to think about how you evolve that leadership team. Are you more a product of your setbacks or your successes? How many of you have kids? You want your kids, you're not worried about how they do with their successes. You're worried when they get knocked down, do they learn how to get back? You will never be a great leader or a great company without managing through those setbacks and mistakes. And you've got to have the courage to dream big. When you think about the future, many people might criticize me of saying, John, you dream too big. I'm actually going to argue that my only regret is I didn't dream big enough, because it forces you to think out of the box and set audacious goals. And about the time your team is comfortable with the goals you're setting, you want to stretch the goals further. So when I think about solving world hunger, I think it's going to be about insects. And I think it's going to be about crickets solving the world hunger, not just for the poor of the world, but crickets being the next lobster. It's 1/7 the environmental impact that meat is, and it is much more effective than the protein we get out of literally plants. How many people in this room would like to try cricket today? They're about to become mainstream in France. And the point that I'm doing now is what? About the time you're comfortable with what I'm suggesting, I want you to stretch beyond it. Because if you don't have the courage to try the crickets, you never know what's going to happen. So I would like to kind of, Shannon, if you will, pass out some crickets. And I'd like for people to try it. Not so much that the crickets are great, but I want to get you comfortable with disruption. So I started off my goals today very simply, looking at what are the mistakes that companies make. How do you avoid that, whether you're in a large company or a small company? What are the expectations of leaders, and how do we as leaders have to reinvent ourselves? How do we get comfortable dealing with issues, whether it's kidding about our spouse, but really the change that you have to go through and being transparent within the organization? And about the time you think you're really taking risk, bring crickets to the party. I'm really talking about how you change. My goal today is, if you believed everything and very comfortable with everything I said and you agree with it, I have failed. I want to make you a little bit uncomfortable, because I think the future is about disruption. And I think it will be inclusive globally, but only if we have the courage to change. Last comment, have the courage to dream big. Thank you very much.